Night over the desert felt harmless at first, and I remember telling myself that nothing unusual would happen tonight. From the cockpit of my Mirage F1, the world below looked almost peaceful, a dark ocean of sand broken only by the faint, irregular glimmers of our mobile SAM crews moving across the dunes. Their headlights flickered like fireflies drifting along the front line. My instruments glowed a soft green, steady and familiar. Altitude, fuel, engine temperature, all within limits. The radio hissed quietly, offering nothing but the comfort of routine. I'd flown this patrol so many times that the motions lived in my muscles. Mark the checkpoints, sweep the radar, scan the horizon, listen to the hum of the Adder 9K50 engine as it vibrated through the seat and into my spine. Even the night air felt predictable, smooth against the wings as I cruised high above the desert. Far below, the war continued in its usual slow, grinding rhythm. Nothing suggested that tonight would be different. And yet, something pressed against my nerves. At first it appeared on the radar as the faintest smear of a return, so small, so weak it could have been clutter. I tapped the display, adjusted the gain, swept again. There it was, a flicker moving too slow for a fighter, too low for a bomber, and too steady to be debris. I frowned, leaned closer, tracking its hesitant crawl along the edge of my scope. It didn't belong there. A pulse of unease tightened in my chest, subtle but cold. I couldn't identify it, but I felt the wrongness of it immediately, like a shift in the air before a storm. Shadows in war often come with warnings, and this one whispered through the cockpit like a breath on the back of my neck. For a moment I just stared at that faint echo, isolated against the emptiness of the screen. Something had entered my airspace, something that should not have been here. I didn't know it yet, but the night had just cracked open. And whatever was approaching would be far worse than anything I had been trained to expect. Years of war had shaped the way I saw the sky, and that night I carried every belief we'd built over years of blood and fire. The Mirage F1 was our pride, fast, sharp, born to kill at distance or up close. We had proven ourselves again and again against Iranian Phantoms, Tomcats, even the old Sukhoi. We believed in a simple, comforting law of air combat. If you saw the target first, you were the hunter. And hunters did not die. So when I studied that strange radar contact, small and uncertain, I felt instinct push confidence over caution. Whatever it was, it flew slow, unaware, almost clumsy. A support aircraft, perhaps. Something harmless. Something that would never challenge a fighter like mine. That was what we all believed, that technology might assist a pilot, but it would never outmatch a trained man in a combat aircraft. That doctrine was practically carved into our bones. The EF-111 Raven. Yes, we knew about it. But only as a rumor. A jammer. A flying radio tower. No missiles. No guns. No threat. A thing to chase away or destroy in passing. Nothing more. If anything, I almost felt sorry for the crew who dared to venture into contested airspace without a single weapon to defend themselves. Brave or foolish, I could not decide which. But as I tracked that weak return gliding low over the desert, something in its movement unsettled me. It flew with a strange confidence, as if wrapped in its own cocoon of safety. I imagined two men inside, relaxed, unaware of the hunter above them. I told myself this would be simple. A short interception. A swift kill. Another routine mark in the logbook. What I didn't understand, what none of us understood, was that the war had already shifted beneath our feet. Speed, altitude, and missiles were no longer the ultimate truth. Something else had entered the fight, something invisible, silent, and far more dangerous than metal or fire. I was flying guided by old beliefs. They were flying guided by a new age I had never seen. And as I rolled the Mirage toward the target, confident in everything I had been taught, I felt the first subtle fracture in that certainty. A tension inside me barely noticeable, like a hairline crack in glass. It would break open soon. Everything would. I eased the Mirage into its descent, settling into the familiar rhythm of the attack profile. Everything about it felt comfortable, almost routine. The target drifted at the edge of my radar like a slow-moving insect. I locked it, confirmed the range, checked the angle. Textbook perfect. My instructors would have nodded with approval. This was the kind of engagement we had drilled 1,000 times. Clean, controlled, decisive. As I armed the magic missile, a quiet confidence filled the cockpit. My hands moved without hesitation. Throttle steady. Altitude decreasing. The desert below spread into a soft, dark ocean. I imagined the EF-111 crew still unaware, still believing themselves safe under whatever electronic shield they trusted so blindly. The tone chirped in my headset. Solid lock. I exhaled slowly and pressed the trigger. The missile dropped, ignited, and streaked ahead in a brilliant white spear. For a brief moment, everything aligned exactly as it should. The trajectory was beautiful, steady, unbroken. Victory felt inevitable. One clean strike. One kill. The world made sense. Then the sky exploded. The Raven erupted into a storm of flares, more than I had ever seen, a blinding cascade of fire raining downward. At the same time, my headphones screamed with electronic distortion so harsh it felt like needles driven into my skull. The radar picture twisted into chaos. The missile, my perfect missile, jerked violently off course as if yanked by an invisible hand. In a heartbeat it lost its mind. The bright streak bent sharply, spiraled, and vanished into the dark like a frightened animal fleeing the hunt. I froze. This wasn't possible. No support aircraft behaved like that. No jammer carried such agility, such violence in its defenses. I stared at the instruments, waiting for some familiar pattern to reappear, for logic to return. Instead, my displays flickered with rolling waves of static. Nothing made sense. The Raven dropped lower, slipping away with a strange, effortless grace. I felt something rare blooming inside me, a thread of disbelief twined with something colder. The rules I had trusted all my life had just shattered. And I knew, with a clarity that cut through the confusion, that this fight was no longer the simple kill I had expected. The sky had changed, and so had my place in it. I fired the second magic almost out of reflex, as if speed alone could force the world back into familiar order. The lock-on sounded weak, distorted, but I took the shot anyway. The missile streaked forward, cutting a pale arc through the night. For a heartbeat I believed it might succeed despite everything. But the Raven responded with another burst of brilliance. Flares blossoming like molten flowers, bursts of noise ripping through my radar until the screen dissolved into a storm of static. The missile swerved, panicked, and tore off into the darkness. Another perfect shot reduced to nothing. My pulse hammered against the oxygen mask. I pushed the Mirage lower, chasing the flickering trace of the target, but the desert twisted beneath me, rising and falling in shadows and ridges. The Raven hugged the contours of the terrain with uncanny precision, vanishing into folds of sand just as I thought I had it cornered. My radar no longer showed a plane, only a roiling smear of interference. I felt blind, stripped of the senses I relied on to survive. This wasn't combat anymore. It was pursuit of a ghost. I switched to guns, the last resort. Cannons meant getting close enough to see the target with my own eyes. Close enough to kill without electronics, without guidance. I pushed the throttle forward, the Mirage responding with a surge of speed that pressed me back into my seat. I could feel the plane come alive, eager to fight the way it was built to. Then I saw it, a shadow darting between dunes. I lined up the shot, squeezed the trigger, and tracers carved the darkness. But the Raven twisted away with impossible timing, slipping out of my sight as if anticipating my movements before I made them. My rounds sliced empty air. The instruments flickered, altitude, radar, even the artificial horizon stuttering under the assault of its jamming. I felt the Mirage shudder in confusion, as if it too sensed the madness of this encounter. Each second pulled me deeper into frustration, then into something darker, a sense that the sky itself had turned against me. And then the Raven dove into a narrow valley carved between towering dunes. A reckless maneuver at that speed. I followed. That was the moment everything changed, though I didn't realize it yet. I had crossed the line between attack and disaster. The moment I dropped into the valley after the Raven, the desert transformed into a dark, twisting blade pressed against my throat. At this altitude, every dune rose like a moving wall, every ridge a hidden trap. My Mirage sliced forward at a speed that turned the ground into a rushing blur, and suddenly the cockpit felt smaller, tighter, as if the air itself resisted my presence. My fingers trembled on the stick. Sweat collected beneath my gloves. One mistake now would mean I wouldn't have time to scream before the sand swallowed me whole. I searched desperately for the Raven, but all I could see was its fading trail of disturbed air and the echoes of jamming crackling through my headset. The radio spat nothing but static. My instruments flickered again, symbols blinking, disappearing, reappearing in wrong places. Flying blind in combat is terror enough. Flying blind while chasing something you don't understand is worse. Much worse. For the first time in all my years in the sky, I felt fear settle into me like ice. Not the quick flash before a missile launch, not the tension of a dogfight. This was deeper, older, the fear of knowing I had no control, that my training, my manuals, my instincts were useless here. The Mirage felt unsteady beneath me, or maybe that was my pulse shaking the world. I tried to steady my breathing, but the mask only tightened the sensation of suffocation. Somewhere ahead, Inside that unarmed shadow, two men were fighting their own battle. Pilot and electronic warfare officer. Their lives depended on perfect coordination. If I closed the distance even a little, no jamming in the world would save them. They knew it. I imagined their voices, strained but measured, calling out readings, corrections, warnings. They weren't warriors tonight so much as survivors. War does this, strips away the metal, the noise, the symbols painted on our tails. What's left is just people trapped inside machines hurtling through darkness. I thought of that as I skimmed dangerously close to a ridge, sand exploding in my wake. Somewhere in the chaos, I wondered if the men in the Raven were afraid too, or if they felt something else entirely: desperation, focus, maybe even pity. The valley narrowed. My options thinned with it. And in that tightening throat of sand and shadow, I understood the truth I had been refusing since the first missile failed. I wasn't fighting a plane. I was fighting an ending. The valley tightened around me like a closing fist, and the Mirage shuddered as I tried to keep enough air beneath the wings to stay alive. The Raven's jamming washed over my cockpit in violent waves, blinding the radar completely, drowning my sensors in harsh, metallic noise. I felt as though my aircraft were losing pieces of itself one by one, sight, hearing, balance, leaving only instinct and fear to keep me airborne. Then, without warning, the Raven pulled up. Not a gentle climb. A brutal, vertical clawing at the sky, afterburners erupting in a column of fire so bright it cut through the darkness like a blade. For a moment it looked less like an aircraft and more like a star being torn free of the desert. I yanked back on the stick, trying to follow, but the Mirage hesitated. I felt the lag immediately: altitude too low, energy too thin, my margin for survival scraped down to nothing. My vision blurred as G-forces pressed me into the seat. Through the haze I saw its electronic countermeasures hammer my instruments, each pulse a blow that shook the cockpit. The artificial horizon tumbled wildly. The ground and sky reversed, twisted, merged. A flash of disorientation stabbed through me. I fought to level the aircraft, but my reactions came a fraction too late. Always a fraction. The horizon vanished. All that remained was motion, weight, confusion. I didn't even realize how low I had dropped until the desert surged upward in a single monstrous sweep. The sand was no longer a distant blur beneath me. Now it was a solid wall rushing toward the canopy. My stomach clenched. I tried to pull up again, scream something I couldn't hear over the chaos, but the Mirage had nothing left to give. For a heartbeat, time slowed. I felt the engine strain, heard metal protesting in a rising wail, saw the faint ghost of the Raven disappearing into the night above me, untouched, unarmed, and impossibly alive. Then the world exploded. A fireball blossomed around me as the Mirage struck the desert, tearing itself apart in an eruption of flame and sand. The impact ripped everything away: sound, breath, thought, leaving only a crushing emptiness where the cockpit had been. The sky above remained calm, indifferent, as the Raven continued its climb toward safety. The result of the encounter was brutal and simple. The fighter died. The unarmed aircraft survived. And before dawn broke, the entire shape of the air war changed forever. They told the story later without emotion, as if recounting a technical anomaly rather than the quiet collapse of everything I had believed in. A Mirage F1 lost in the night. No enemy weapons fired. No dogfight, no missile duel, no heroic last stand. Just a sudden absence on radar, a plume of fire rising from the dunes, and an unarmed American aircraft returning to base without a scratch. In the official reports, the language was sterile, loss attributed to spatial disorientation exacerbated by electronic interference. But underneath the clipped phrases, a deeper truth vibrated like an unspoken confession. Electronic warfare had defeated firepower. The myth of the hunter's superiority, ours, mine, died that night over the desert. The Mirage, the machine we trusted with our lives, had been helpless against something we could neither see nor fight. And the Raven, that strange, ungainly aircraft we had dismissed as a harmless support platform, had slipped through danger by wielding a weapon invisible to our eyes: knowledge. Control of the electromagnetic sky. What stung most wasn't the destruction of the aircraft. Planes can be replaced. It was the collapse of certainty. The realization that the rules we had lived by, the ones drilled into our bones, no longer held power. We had entered a new era without understanding it, stumbling into the future while clinging to doctrines already turning to dust. In the days after the crash, the whispers spread through briefing rooms and hangars. Pilots spoke quietly, glancing at radar sets as if they might come alive and betray them. Some refused to believe what had happened. Others accepted it with the grim resignation of soldiers who know the tides of war shift without mercy. A few simply stared at the desert horizon, imagining the glimmer of flares, the roar of jamming, the moment when confidence fractures into dread. As for me, though I did not walk away from that night, a part of my memory lingers in the sky where it happened. I imagine the wreckage cooling in the sand, the flames slowly dying as dawn approaches. Somewhere far above, the Raven flies on, its crew exhausted but alive, unaware of the legacy they have just written. History would say the encounter changed air warfare. For me, it ended a lifetime of belief in the old myths. Electronic ghosts had defeated steel. And a new kind of war had begun.